The temple stood in silence on a faraway alien planet, hidden deep inside a valley where storms never ended. For centuries, lightning had struck its tall black pillars, and the air carried the heavy smell of dust and burning stone. Inside the temple, on a raised altar of ancient rock, rested a sword. Its blade glowed faintly with blue light, as if alive, humming like a quiet song. The sword was no ordinary weapon. Every alien knew the legend. The sword was said to belong to the first rulers of their world, forged by powers long forgotten. Whoever lifted it would command not only armies but also the respect of the galaxy. But there was a curse. No alien had ever been able to lift it. The stories had traveled across planets and stars. Brave warriors, proud generals, and even alien kings had walked into that temple to test themselves. They had grabbed the sword with claws, hands, and even with mechanical arms powered by machines. Every attempt ended the same way. The sword refused them. Some were thrown across the room as if struck by lightning. Others cried in pain as fire burned through their veins the moment they touched it. The sword rejected them all. Yet no one gave up on the legend. They believed that one day someone would be chosen. That chosen one would bring change to all life across the galaxy. On this day, the temple was full again. Hundreds of aliens gathered, filling the dark hall. The walls were carved with glowing marks, each one telling a story of war and conquest. The crowd whispered in dozens of languages, their voices echoing like ghosts. At the front, a tall alien general with 4 shining eyes and armor made of bone stepped toward the altar. His heavy steps shook the floor. The crowd grew silent. This warrior had destroyed armies. His people believed he was destined to succeed where others had failed. The general raised his hands, gripping the hilt with his strong fingers. He pulled. The sword did not move. He growled, pulling harder, his body shaking with effort. The glowing blade only burned brighter, and suddenly he cried out in pain. A flash of blue fire shot through his arms, throwing him backward across the stone floor. He fell with a heavy crash, his armor smoking. The crowd gasped, but none were surprised. Once again, the sword had chosen no one. More warriors tried. One after another, aliens of different races stepped forward, each stronger or stranger than the last. Some were tall with sharp horns, others with wings that spread wide, and some with armored skin hard as steel. All failed. The sword glowed, rejecting every single hand that touched it. The crowd began to grow restless. Some laughed bitterly, saying the legend was only a lie. Others whispered that the chosen one would never come. But then, a murmur spread through the hall. At the back of the crowd, a figure stood quietly, watching. He was not an alien. He was a human. His uniform was plain, the armor of a soldier, scratched and scarred from battles. Compared to the towering aliens, he looked small, almost fragile. Yet his eyes were steady. He had traveled far, sent as an observer, nothing more. But now the aliens turned their attention to him. "Let the human try," one voice shouted mockingly. The hall erupted with laughter. Many aliens laughed so hard their voices shook the pillars. "A human?" they sneered. "They are weak. They are nothing. How can a small creature like him touch the sacred blade?" Others warned in cold tones. "If he tries, he may die. The sword burns those unworthy." The human did not answer. He did not argue or boast. He stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The crowd grew quiet again, not out of respect but out of curiosity. They wanted to see him fail. They wanted to see him scream like the others. The temple's glowing walls seemed to watch him as he walked to the altar. When he reached the sword, he stopped. For a long moment he simply looked at it. The blue light reflected in his eyes, and the hum of the blade grew louder, almost like it was calling to him. The aliens held their breath. No one had ever seen the sword react this way before. The human stretched out his hand. His fingers wrapped around the hilt. The crowd waited for the burn, the scream, the shock of failure. But none came. The human stood firm, calm, his hand resting on the weapon as if it belonged to him. A low gasp moved through the hall. The sword was not rejecting him. In fact, Its glow began to grow brighter, the hum rising to a strange song that echoed through the temple. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the tall pillars. The altar shook as the sword seemed to pulse with life. The human tightened his grip. The blade trembled in response. The aliens stared in disbelief, eyes wide, unable to understand what they were seeing. For centuries, the sword had defied every alien hand. But now, before their very eyes, it seemed ready to yield. And it was not to one of them, it was to a human. The temple was now filled with silence so deep that even the sound of the wind outside seemed to vanish. Hundreds of alien eyes, in all shapes and colors, were fixed on the human. His hand was still resting on the sword, and unlike all others before him, he did not shake or scream. His skin was not burned. His body was not thrown across the floor, and his face showed no fear. The sword, which had always rejected every attempt, glowed brighter under his touch, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The aliens, who once laughed and mocked, now stood frozen, their voices trapped in their throats. None dared to speak because they all knew something extraordinary was happening. The legend they had recited for centuries, the prophecy they had almost stopped believing, was unfolding before their very eyes. The human did not rush. He took a slow breath and kept his eyes on the glowing blade. He had heard their insults, he had felt their stares, but none of it mattered. Deep in his heart, he was not here to prove anyone wrong. He was simply drawn to the weapon, as if some invisible thread connected him to it. His fingers tightened on the hilt, and the hum of the sword rose, a sound like thunder rolling in the distance. The temple itself seemed alive, the carvings on the walls burning with light, the air growing heavier as though the weight of destiny pressed down on everyone present. Whispers finally broke the silence. "This cannot be," an alien priest muttered, his long fingers trembling as he clutched the staff in his hand. "The chosen one cannot be human. The gods would never allow this." But his words carried no strength, for even he could not deny what his own eyes were seeing. Others hissed in anger, their pride stung by the thought that a creature they considered weak and unworthy might be the one destined to succeed. Still, there were those in the crowd whose eyes softened, filled with awe, for they understood what the moment truly meant. The prophecy never said the chosen one would be alien. It only said the one worthy would be unlike all others, and now the truth was undeniable. The human lifted the sword slightly, testing its weight. It resisted at first as if measuring him, but then it loosened, shifting in his grip. A wave of energy rushed through him, strong enough to make his heart pound like drums. The sword whispered to him, not in words but in feelings, memories of ancient battles, voices of rulers long dead, and visions of stars burning across endless skies. The blade was alive and it was choosing him. His knees almost buckled under the power flowing into him, but he stood firm, his will stronger than the storm inside. Gasps echoed around the temple. The aliens had never seen the sword respond like this. A massive creature with scaled skin and tusks stepped forward, its deep voice filled with fury. "This is a trick," it roared, pointing a claw at the human. "No human can hold the sacred weapon. He will fail like the rest. He must fail." The aliens' anger spread through the hall, and others shouted in agreement, their voices rising like fire. They did not want to believe because belief would mean their own greatness was less than that of a human. Yet even as they screamed, their eyes betrayed their fear, for none of them could deny that the blade still glowed in the human's hand. The human ignored their cries. He focused only on the sword. The longer he held it, the stronger the connection became. The hum of the blade turned into a powerful song, echoing against the stone walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. The alien crowd fell into uneasy silence again, the sound pressing against their ears and hearts like a call they could not understand. The human felt the weight of all their stares, yet he did not falter. He knew this was more than just lifting a sword. It was a challenge not only of strength but of spirit, and he would not back down. At last, with a steady pull, the sword rose fully from the altar. The glowing blade lifted into the air, shining brighter than the sun itself. Light filled the temple, flooding every corner, pushing back the shadows that had lived there for centuries. The human raised the sword high, and the power surged through him until it felt like the stars themselves burned in his veins. The aliens shielded their eyes, unable to look directly at the light, their disbelief turning to awe. For generations, the sacred weapon had mocked them, refused them, humiliated them. Now it had chosen, and it had chosen a human. The human lowered the blade slowly, his breathing heavy but steady. He did not smile, he did not boast. He only looked around at the sea of faces, knowing that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. Some aliens bowed their heads, accepting what had happened. Others clenched their fists, their pride crushed. But every single one of them knew the truth. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and the chosen one was standing before them with the sword in his hand. The temple glowed like it had never glowed before. Every ancient symbol carved into the black stone walls began to burn with brilliant light, as if the sword's awakening had breathed life back into the ruins. Dust fell from the ceiling, the floor trembled as though the planet itself was reacting, and the blue fire running along the blade's edge grew stronger, casting strange shadows across the chamber. The human gripped the hilt tightly, his arm trembling not from weakness but from the force of the energy rushing through him. It was unlike anything he had ever felt in his life, both terrifying and empowering. The sword was not a simple weapon. It was alive, filled with the echoes of history, memories of kings, warriors, and civilizations long gone. Their voices spoke to him in flashes, showing him battles that had shaped empires and destroyed worlds. He saw visions of alien kings kneeling in the same chamber, their faces twisted in agony as the sword burned them. He saw armies marching beneath banners of fire, clashing in wars that spanned across galaxies. He saw rulers who once carried the blade standing on the edge of victory and then falling into betrayal and ruin. Every vision came like lightning in his mind, quick and sharp, filling his head with more than he thought he could endure. But unlike the others who had tried before him, the human did not collapse. He did not scream. His heart was steady, and though his knees felt weak, his spirit held firm. Somehow, deep inside, he knew the sword was testing him, weighing his soul. The crowd of aliens watched in disbelief, their many eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear, awe, and anger. Some fell to their knees, whispering prayers to gods they had long abandoned, convinced that destiny was being written in front of them. Others growled, their claws digging into the stone floor, unwilling to accept that a human, a small creature from a young world barely known in the galaxy, was wielding what none of them could touch. A group of alien elders huddled together, their faces pale with shock, whispering that the prophecy had been fulfilled. They recited the old words, "The blade will burn the unworthy, but in the hand of the chosen, it will shine brighter than a star." And now that star was blinding them. The human tried to steady his breathing as the power surged stronger. The sword's light reflected in his eyes, turning them into mirrors of fire. He could feel every heartbeat echo through the blade, as if his life and the weapon's life had become one. The whispers of ancient rulers grew louder, guiding him, teaching him, warning him. They told him of balance, of burden, of the price of power. They told him that the one who held the sword would not only carry strength but also responsibility. Responsibility that could crush him if he faltered. The human clenched his jaw. He did not ask for this, but he could not turn away now. The sword had chosen him, and that choice came with destiny. Then, the ground shook harder, and the blue flames of the sword shot upward, striking the high ceiling and filling the chamber with thunder. A wave of energy burst outward, knocking many aliens to their knees. Some screamed as the light burned their eyes, while others shielded their faces with their arms. The temple felt alive, roaring like a living beast that had been asleep for centuries and was now awakened. The human stood in the center of it all, his body surrounded by a glowing aura, his silhouette sharp against the fire. The aliens could not look away, for in that moment he was no longer just a man. He was something greater, something beyond their understanding. But with the awakening came fear. The alien generals, proud and bitter from their failures, stepped forward with rage in their voices. "This cannot be allowed. one shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. He is not one of us. He is not worthy. Another alien roared, his massive fists slamming against his chest, demanding that the humans surrender the sword before the balance of their world was broken. Yet even as they shouted, none dared to move closer. The blade in the human's hand hummed like a warning, its light pulsing with each beat of his heart. The human finally lowered the sword, letting its tip hover above the stone floor. His face was calm, though his eyes carried the weight of the visions he had seen. He looked at the crowd of aliens, at their fear and anger, and then at those who bowed their heads in awe. He did not speak, but his silence was louder than words. The sword had chosen him, and nothing they could say would change that. The hum of the blade filled the air, reminding everyone in the chamber that destiny was not theirs to command. Yet deep in the crowd, hidden among the shadows, one alien warlord clenched his jaw. His skin was marked with scars, his body tall and armored with plates of natural bone. His people had worshipped the sword for generations, and he believed it was his birthright to wield it. Seeing it in the hand of a human was a wound to his pride so deep that it burned like fire. As he watched the human standing tall with the glowing blade, hatred grew in his heart, and a vow formed in his mind. If the sword had chosen a human, then he would take it by force. The awakening of the sword was not the end of the legend. It was only the beginning. The sword's glow slowly dimmed to a steady pulse, as if it had settled into the rhythm of the human's heartbeat. The temple that had once seemed like a ruin was now alive, filled with the low hum of ancient power. Dust and smoke lingered in the air, creating a haze that made the blue light of the blade look like fire cutting through fog. The crowd of aliens remained frozen, torn between awe and denial. Some fell to their knees in surrender, whispering that the prophecy had been fulfilled. Others clenched their fists, trembling with rage that a human, a creature they had mocked as weak, stood in the place of honor they had sought for centuries. The silence was heavy, until one voice broke through, sharp and venomous. It was the warlord who had stood in the shadows, his massive body like a tower of muscle and bone. He stepped forward, his heavy footsteps echoing like drumbeats across the temple floor. His eyes glowed with hatred, his tusks bared in a snarl. He had fought in countless wars, crushed enemies beneath his blade, and ruled his people with fear. For him, the sword was not a relic of legend. It was his destiny, stolen before his very eyes by a species he considered nothing more than fragile animals. He pointed a clawed hand at the human, his voice booming with rage. This is a lie. This is a trick. The sword belongs to us, to our bloodline, not to some wandering outsider. His roar shook the walls, and many in the crowd shouted in agreement, their voices rising in anger. The rebellion had begun. The human did not flinch. He kept the sword lowered at his side, its glow steady, as though it was aware of the storm rising around him. He could feel the hostility in the air, a sharp tension that pressed against his skin. He had not come here to steal anything, nor had he asked for this power. Yet now, with the sword in his hand, he knew he could not back away. Destiny had chosen him, and whether he wanted it or not, he had to face what came next. The warlord's heavy steps brought him closer, his armored feet cracking the stone floor with every stride. He raised his weapon, a massive axe made from the bone of some ancient beast, its edges sharp enough to split steel. The crowd fell back, making room, their eyes fixed on the coming clash. The warlord's voice thundered again. You will fall here, human. The sword will return to its rightful place. And when you are gone, your kind will be remembered only as the fools who thought they could steal from the gods. His words were filled with venom, but beneath them was something more. A desperate need to protect his pride, to prove that the blade had not betrayed him. With a roar that shook the air, he charged, his axe raised high, every muscle in his body burning with fury. The human lifted the sword, not with arrogance but with steady resolve. He had no years of training with this weapon, no knowledge of its powers. Yet the moment the warlord's shadow loomed over him, the sword seemed to guide his hand. The blue flame along its edge burned brighter, and his body moved as if responding to whispers only he could hear. The clash came like thunder. The warlord's axe struck with the force of a mountain falling, but the sword met it with a sharp ring that echoed through the temple. Sparks of blue fire exploded, lighting up the chamber, throwing shadows across the walls. The battle that followed was unlike anything the crowd had ever seen. The warlord attacked with brute force, each swing of his axe splitting the stone beneath their feet. He moved like a storm, his strength enough to crush any other opponent. But the human, guided by the sword, moved with surprising speed, his strikes clean and precise. Each time the warlord swung, the sword met him, creating shockwaves that rattled the pillars and made the carvings tremble with light. The alien crowd roared, some cheering for their champion, others watching in awe as the human held his ground. The fight dragged on, the warlord growing more furious with every clash. Sweat and rage dripped from him, his strikes becoming wilder, fueled by desperation rather than skill. The human, though weary, did not falter. The sword carried him, its energy flowing through his veins, filling his arms with strength that was not his own. Each time he raised the blade, it hummed louder, and with each strike, it seemed to grow more alive, as if it had waited centuries for this very duel. The warlord bellowed, charging for one final blow, his axe raised high above his head. The human gripped the sword with both hands, the blue fire blazing brighter than ever, and swung with all his strength. The clash was deafening. The warlord's axe shattered, the broken pieces scattering across the floor. The force of the blow threw him backward, his massive body crashing against the stone pillars, leaving cracks in their ancient surface. He groaned, his armor broken, his pride shattered more deeply than his bones. The human stood tall, the sword still glowing in his grip, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The crowd fell silent, the echoes of the battle ringing in their ears. For the first time in their history, the undefeatable warlord had been defeated, and not by another alien, but by a human chosen by the sacred sword. The warlord tried to rise, his body trembling with effort, but the strength had left him. His eyes burned with hatred, yet also with fear. He realized the truth he could no longer deny. The blade had chosen another. The human looked at him, not with cruelty but with calm determination. He did not deliver a killing blow. He lowered the sword slowly, letting the silence of mercy speak louder than any victory cry. The aliens watching understood what that meant. Strength alone did not make a leader. Honor did. And in that moment, they saw both in the human who stood before them. The rebellion that had begun with shouts of anger ended in silence and awe. The human had proven not only that he was chosen but that he carried the heart of a true warrior. The temple no longer felt like a battlefield but a place of judgment, where destiny had been decided. The aliens who had once mocked him now looked at him differently. Some bowed, others remained frozen, but none could deny the truth anymore. The sword had chosen, and its choice was final. The silence in the temple stretched long after the final clash had ended. The warlord lay broken against the cracked stone, his once unshakable pride crushed beneath the weight of defeat. His shattered axe lay in pieces at his side, a symbol of the end of an age where strength alone commanded respect. The crowd of aliens, who had filled the chamber with mockery and laughter when the human first stepped forward, now stared at him with wide eyes filled with fear, awe, and reluctant acceptance. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. The glow of the sword in the human's hand was enough to silence even the boldest voices. The weapon, alive with ancient power, had chosen its master, and there was no argument left that could deny what every witness had seen with their own eyes. The human stood still, breathing deeply, the fire of the sword still pulsing through his veins. His body was weary, his muscles aching from the battle, but he did not falter. The blade hummed softly now, as though content, its blue light steady and calm, no longer a storm but a guiding flame. The visions he had seen earlier still echoed in his mind. Wars that stretched across galaxies, kings rising and falling, and the burden of carrying a power that could change the fate of civilizations. He knew in that moment that his life was no longer his own. By lifting the sword, he had stepped into a destiny that would carry him far beyond this temple, far beyond the world he stood on now. Among the crowd, whispers began to rise. Some aliens dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in reverence, their voices trembling as they recited the prophecy their ancestors had carried for centuries. Others turned away in shame, unable to face the truth that a human had achieved what their kind had failed to do for generations. There were still those who seethed with anger, their pride unwilling to surrender, but even their rage was muted, for the sword's presence was a force they could not resist. The weapon's glow reached out like a command, forcing even the most rebellious hearts to accept the truth, if only for this moment. The warlord groaned, struggling to rise to his knees, his body battered but his spirit refusing to bend. His eyes burned with fury as he glared at the human, but in that fury was also a shadow of fear. He had felt the sword's power firsthand, and he knew that no warrior, no matter how strong, could stand against it once it had chosen its master. Still, his pride would not let him remain silent. With a hoarse growl, he spat words of venom. "You are no king. You are no savior. You are a thief, stealing what was meant for our kind." His voice echoed through the chamber, but it was weaker now, lacking the thunder it once carried. The human did not respond. He simply looked at the warlord with calm, steady eyes, then turned his gaze to the rest of the crowd. His silence spoke louder than the warlord's rage. One of the alien elders, ancient and frail, stepped forward with slow, careful steps. His robes dragged across the stone floor, and his many eyes glowed faintly as he raised his hands. "The prophecy never promised that the chosen one would be alien," the elder said, his voice trembling with age but steady with conviction. "It spoke only of worthiness, of spirit, of a heart unbroken by greed or pride. And now we see the truth. The sword has chosen, and its choice is final. To deny it is to deny destiny itself." His words carried across the hall, calming some and silencing others. The younger warriors shifted uncomfortably, torn between pride and belief, but the elder's wisdom weighed heavily upon them. The human tightened his grip on the sword, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. He had not asked for this, yet he could not refuse it. He was no king, no prophet, no savior. He was a soldier, someone who had fought battles and known loss, someone who understood struggle and sacrifice. And perhaps that was why the sword had chosen him. It was not his strength alone but his heart, his resolve, and his refusal to bend to despair that made him worthy. The blade, alive and knowing, had seen in him what no alien had understood. Slowly, he raised the sword high, letting its blue fire shine across the hall, touching every alien face with its light. The glow seemed to chase away the shadows that had clung to the temple for centuries, filling the air with warmth and clarity. The crowd gasped, their voices hushed, as if the weapon itself was delivering a promise through its master. For the first time in their history, the aliens saw not a conqueror or a ruler but a beacon, a figure who stood not above them but among them, carrying a destiny that reached beyond race, beyond pride, beyond blood. The warlord lowered his head at last, his body trembling with exhaustion and defeat. Though his eyes still burned with bitterness, even he could not deny what had happened. The temple, once a place of failed trials and broken pride, now stood as a witness to a new beginning. The human lowered the blade slowly, his breathing steady, and his eyes lifted toward the high ceiling of the temple. Beyond the stone roof lay the stars, countless and endless, waiting for him. He understood that this moment was not an ending but a beginning. The sword had chosen him not only for this battle but for battles yet to come. His path would stretch across galaxies, and his destiny would carry the weight of entire civilizations. The aliens watched in silence as he stepped forward, the sword glowing at his side. Each step echoed like thunder in their hearts, a reminder that the world they knew had ended and a new one had begun. Some bowed fully, pressing their foreheads to the floor. Others stood stiffly, struggling to accept the truth. But none could look away. The human was no longer just an outsider. He was the chosen one, and the galaxy would never forget the day the ancient sword defied every alien hand, only to yield to his.